Comics are weird, there's no doubt about that. Sometimes they're the good kind, sometimes they're the bad, sometimes they're confusing, and sometimes they're just mad. I can't deny that their inherent insanity is one of the many reasons why I love comic books. I mean, where else am I going to see a Russian big game hunter use a tea party to track and capture a sentient cosmic cube that's taken the shape of a little girl and is being used by S.H.I.E.L.D. to trap a bunch of supervillains in a Pleasantville-esque reality prison? What I'm trying to say is that most comics are equal parts dumb and fun. The kind that make you stare wide-eyed like you're a kid again and say, "That's so cool," but also slap your forehead in frustration and yell, "That's so dumb." And that brings us to the meat of this little ramble, the relationship between Thanos and Death. Now there's a lot of crazy relationships in superhero comics. I mean, we've got Magneto and Rogue, Ultimate, Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver, Hal Jordan and Arisia, Deathstroke and Anyway, but yeah, those are just creepy and gross. But none of them are as off the scale crazy as Thanos and Death. Now in the MCU, which most people will be familiar with, Thanos' motivation for wiping out half of all life in the universe is to balance the scales and prevent mass extinction. And in a way, that's part of comic book Thanos' motivation too. But the primary one that you might have heard of is that he wants to please the love of his life, Mistress Death. Long story short, it doesn't work out. She gets kind of pissed off that the guy who's supposed to work for her is now the most powerful being in the universe, and Thanos gets pissed that she's pissed, and creates a gender-bent version of himself to be his girlfriend. Yeah, it's a mess. But while Infinity Gauntlet is the most famous story of Thanos and Death's very, very dysfunctional relationship, it wasn't the beginning of it, or at least that became the case when Thanos Rising was published in 2013, an origin comic for Thanos that fills us in on how he and Death first met. So let's start at the very beginning, and by very beginning I mean the very beginning, as in Thanos' birth. Yep, that's right, the personification of all death in the Marvel universe is a cradle robber. You see, Thanos was different from the other kids. Compared to them, he was a purple, red-eyed freak whose mother may or may not have tried to stab him in his soft spot. But he never had any trouble making friends. In fact, he was pretty popular with the ladies, and one in particular caught his eye. Now this girl would go on to be a permanent presence throughout Thanos' childhood, a presence that pushed him towards the mad titan he was destined to become. When his friends were killed by wild animals in a cave-in accident, she suggested that he slaughter them, which gave him a taste for blood. When he grew tired of killing animals, she pushed him towards killing his classmates, and as more time passed, she goaded him into killing more and more people, till he eventually made his way to his aforementioned soft spot stabbing mother. After Thanos failed to find the answers he was looking for in his mother's insides, he left home and took up the occupation of part-time pirate and full-time deadbeat. During this period of his life, he didn't kill and he didn't murder, but he did bone down like a damn rabbit, having kids with dozens of women, all in an attempt to feel something. And when that failed, well, he fell back into old habits and returned to good old-fashioned murderizing. Eventually, he came back home, and who was waiting for him? The girl from his childhood, all grown up. And while she was happy to see him, she wasn't exactly thrilled about all the boots he'd been knocking. Thanos, however, didn't much care about all that, because he'd come to the sudden realization that she was the only woman he ever loved. Aw, isn't that sweet? Well, sweet until you hear how she replied, which was, "Yeah, sure, you can be with me, just make sure to kill every woman you've ever been with and the kids you had with them." And what did Thanos say? Well, yes, of course, the guy's a nihilistic sociopath with damn near every complex and issue in the book. He'd do anything just to feel something. Unfortunately for the Big Purple Titan, the girl turned out to be a bit of a death digger, because even after he'd killed all his past wives and kids, it just wasn't enough for her. So Thanos kept killing and killing and killing and killing, hoping that eventually she would, reciprocate his love, because that's how that works. Except she wouldn't. Not until he became the Mad Titan we all know and love to hate. And that's when the girl finally revealed her true identity as, drumroll please, boom 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 boom, Death, the cosmic abstract entity of the end of all living things. And that if Thanos was to ever be her love, he would need to move beyond killing because he has to, and start killing because he wants to. And after razing his homeworld, after killing every person on its surface, Death finally gave Thanos what he wanted. But thanks to Infinity Gauntlet, we know that it wasn't enough. Not for her, and certainly not for Thanos. Now this is the point in their relationship where things became a lot less soap opera depressing and a lot more comic book crazy. After Infinity Gauntlet, Thanos actually wasn't that much of a villain. He became a cosmic nomad and eventually somewhat of an anti-villain who helped out the other heroes. Him and Death stayed on bad terms, and she even cursed him with immortality, which I guess is the cosmic abstract version of a restraining order, but Thanos kept on trucking, straddling the line between megalomaniac and universal savior. But in comics, not many things last forever, and eventually, after she came to Thanos to have a heart-to-heart, he went back to trying to win over Death. Soon after Thanos and Death's reconciliation, the Annihilation wave, an invasion force of interdimensional bugs led by longtime Fantastic Four villain Annihilation, hit the 616 universe. At that point, Thanos was bored out of his mind and had a teensy bit of a death wish, so he joined Annihilation and helped him during his campaign. Eventually, Thanos' wish came true. He was no longer bored, and he was no longer alive courtesy of Drax the Destroyer and a well-placed fist to the heart. Death, who'd finally decided that he'd proven himself, welcomed Thanos back into her arms. But at that point, Thanos should have known that Death is a fickle mistress. He didn't even get a chance to plan their honeymoon before he was forcibly returned to the land of the living again. Why? To kill the Cancerverse. What's a Cancerverse? Well, imagine if Death, like the concept of it, died, and life was just allowed to grow unchecked and consume everything. That's a Cancerverse, and Death wasn't about to let that happen to the universe she inhabited. And once Thanos, with the help of the Guardians of the Galaxy, successfully stops the Cancerverse, Death kinda just abandons him. So like any deranged mass murderer would, he goes back to wanting to kill the universe. At this point, Thanos and Death's relationship starts to get real rocky. That's right, the stuff before, that's nothing compared to what's coming. Now that they're on the outs again, Death goes and gets herself a new man in the form of Deadpool and starts using him as a boy toy to make Thanos jealous. She succeeds, and Thanos ends up trading blows with a cosmic-powered Wade Wilson. That little skirmish ends with Death ditching them both and Thanos seemingly dying. Yeah, we've heard that one before. Surprise, surprise, Thanos isn't dead, and for some reason Death starts to yearn for the good old days, so she wants Thanos back. Unfortunately for her, centuries of screwing with the guys finally come back to bite her in the bones when Thanos gets sick of her and breaks it off seemingly permanently. With his newfound bachelorhood, he decides to go on a little walkabout, and by walkabout, I mean killing spree. And while that's not entirely out of character for someone like Thanos, this one actually has a purpose, which is to find and kill his long-lost half-inhuman son, because as we know, Thanos' greatest enemy is child support. And to that enemy, he falls, when his son decides to give his dear old dad a taste of his own medicine by trapping him in a state of living death. But that is not the end of it, folks. Not by a long shot. A whole lot of crazy end-of-the-world stuff happens, and the multiverse basically ceases to exist only to be reborn as a brand new universe ruled by God Emperor Doom, who's so obsessed with Reed Richards that even when he's a god, no, not a god, the god, he still can't help but feel inferior to him to the point that he steals the guy's family, turns his brother-in-law into the sun, and transforms his best friend into a living wall. Anyway, one of Marvel's best event comics proceeds to occur, ending with Doom getting tag-teamed by Black Panther wielding the Infinity Gauntlet and Mr. Fantastic with a big fat reality check. Molecule Man resets the multiverse, Miles Morales gets to come to 616 thanks to a cheeseburger, and all is right with the world. Or is it? Well, it never is, and most of the time that's because of Thanos, because guess who has two thumbs and has a brand new love? This guy. That's right, you read that correctly. Thanos fell in love with nothingness, and for a while she was his chief piece, until Ultimates was unceremoniously cancelled and the storyline was shelved. Something I am not the least bit bitter about. Nope, not at all. You'd think that after that Thanos would go back to Death, but he was still pretty bitter with her for, manipulating him throughout the entirety of his life. Plus he sorta began dying from god cancer, and every universal force he'd ever pissed off wanted to kick him while he was down. The cherry on the top of that delicious cancer sundae was that Death was back with a vengeance. Not only was she openly taunting Thanos about his inevitable demise, she'd gone and got herself a new squeeze, Thanos' inhuman son, Thane. In the end, it turned out that this was all a ploy to make Thanos jealous, again, and that Death was the one who gave him God Cancer in the first place. She wanted to make him weak so that she could build him back up again, and after Thanos does some soul searching in a hallucination-inducing god graveyard and punches his son through a planet, he comes to the conclusion that he wants nothing to do with Death. It's too bad she doesn't feel the same way. Now it's time to set the crazy dials to 11, so hold on to your seats, folks. The Punisher, yes that Punisher, imbued with the power cosmic and bonded to the spirit of the Ghost Rider, travels back in time to bring past Thanos to the future, where his future self has won. And by won, I mean every single hero on every single planet has been killed by Thanos. Oh, and he keeps the Hulk as a pet. Future Thanos asks for past Thanos' help to defeat a Mjolnir-wielding Silver Surfer who is also in command of the Annihilation Wave, and once they have their fun, Future Thanos reveals why he really brought him there. To kill him. Why? Because Death, unsurprisingly, is really into snuff, and nothing turns her on more than seeing two versions of her one true love fight to the death. But past Thanos, who is very much over Death, calls his future self pathetic and grants his wish for death by temporal suicide, monkey's paw style, by erasing him from the timeline. With his back fully turned on Death, Thanos decides that the healthiest thing to do is date someone else. And of course, he'd want to date someone completely different from his last ex, right? Right? Wrong! Thanos' new beau ends up being none other than Hela, goddess of death and daughter of Loki. A fling that goes on for a bit, only for Thanos to dump her at the most awkward moment possible. Can you guess why? To get back together with Death, of course! And before Hela even gets a chance to try and win him back, Thanos gets his head chopped off by Gamora, landing him right back into Death's arms. But not that Death's arms, like Death, like actual Death's arms. Currently in the comics, Thanos has stayed dead despite Hela, who's still really into him for some reasons, attempts to resurrect him. So for now, Thanos and Death are on break. But I have a feeling that won't be the case for long. The two of them are like that dysfunctional couple that are trapped in an endless cycle of breaking up and getting back together again, all while rubbing their drama in the faces of everyone around them. And by everyone around them, in this case I mean the universe. But in a way, that's just comics in general. In between the guys in spandex punching each other, there's always been a soap opera element. Whether it's Marvel, DC or IDW, a primary component of their stories is drama and romance. And while Thanos and Death's relationship is more drama than romance, I can't get enough of it. And I can't wait to see what the future holds for this severely screwed up couple. Especially because according to the vision shown to Thor after he used Galactus as a bomb to blow up a universe-consuming Death Winter that had previously destroyed the Justice League, yes, that actually happened, Thanos will be back, and that Death will be right by his side.
Guy love, that's all it is. Guy